Imagine discovering that the person you threw away like garbage was worth $50 billion. That's exactly what happened to two ungrateful children who thought they knew everything about their mother, until it was almost too late. This is the story of Elena Rodriguez, a 62-year-old woman who spent her entire life putting her children first, only to be cast aside when she needed them most. But what her children didn't know was that their humble, self-sacrificing mother was sitting on the largest inheritance in their city's history. Elena had always been the kind of mother who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. For 35 years, she worked double shifts at the local textile factory, her hands growing rough and weathered from the endless hours of labor. Every penny she earned went toward her children's education, their clothes, their dreams. She wore the same 3 dresses for over a decade, rotating them like a uniform of maternal devotion. Her children, Marcus and Isabella, grew up believing their mother was just another working-class woman struggling to make ends meet. They never questioned why she sometimes received mysterious phone calls that made her face go pale, or why she kept a locked wooden box hidden beneath her bed. They were too busy enjoying the fruits of her sacrifice to wonder about the source of their comfort. As Marcus and Isabella climbed the social ladder, Marcus becoming a successful investment banker and Isabella a prominent lawyer, they began to see their mother's modest lifestyle as an embarrassment. When Marcus bought his first mansion in the prestigious Hillcrest neighborhood, he was mortified when Elena would visit wearing her faded dresses and carrying her worn leather purse. "Mom, you really need to update your wardrobe," Isabella would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "What will my colleagues think when they see you?" Elena would smile sadly and nod, never defending herself, never explaining that she chose simplicity not out of poverty, but out of a wisdom her children couldn't comprehend. She had learned long ago that true wealth wasn't measured in designer clothes or luxury cars, but in the love and respect of family. But as the years passed, that love and respect seemed to evaporate like morning dew. Marcus, now 34 and married to a woman who looked down on Elena with barely concealed disgust, began treating his mother like a burden. Isabella, 32 and engaged to a prominent judge, started making excuses to avoid family gatherings. "She's just so ordinary," Isabella confided to her fiancé one evening. "I can't have her at my wedding looking like that. What will people think about our family?" The final blow came on a cold December evening when Elena suffered a minor heart episode. Alone in her small apartment, she managed to call Marcus, her voice weak and frightened. "Marcus, please. I need help. I think I'm having chest pains." "Mom, I'm at an important dinner with clients," Marcus replied irritably. "Can't you call an ambulance or something? I can't just drop everything every time you have a health scare." Elena's heart broke more from his words than from any physical pain. She hung up the phone and called Isabella instead. "Isabella, sweetheart, I'm not feeling well. Could you? Mother, I'm preparing for the biggest case of my career. I don't have time for your dramatic episodes. You always do this when we're busy. It's probably just heartburn from that cheap food you eat." That night, Elena took herself to the hospital, riding in the back of an ambulance with no family by her side. As she lay in the emergency room, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the beeping monitors, she made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, when Marcus and Isabella finally showed up, more out of obligation and concern, Elena looked at them with eyes that had finally seen the truth. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Maybe it's time I move somewhere else. Somewhere I won't be such a burden to you both." Marcus and Isabella exchanged glances, and for a moment, Elena thought she saw relief in their expressions. "Actually, Mom," Marcus said, clearing his throat, "we've been talking, Isabella, and I think it might be better if you found your own place. We can help you look into some senior living communities. Nothing fancy, of course, but something more appropriate for your situation." Elena nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. If only they knew what they were about to lose. But here's what Marcus and Isabella didn't know. Their mother wasn't just Elena Rodriguez, the factory worker. She was Elena Rodriguez Blackwood, the sole heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country, and they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. If you want to find out how 2 greedy children lost a $50 billion inheritance through their own cruelty, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. What would you do if your own children treated you like a burden? Would you tell them about a massive inheritance? Or would you let them learn their lesson the hard way? Let me know in the comments below. Within 2 weeks, Elena found herself packing her few possessions into cardboard boxes, while her children supervised like prison guards, ensuring a smooth eviction. The apartment that had been her home for 15 years suddenly felt foreign, as if she were a stranger gathering the remnants of someone else's life. Isabella stood by the window, tapping her manicured nails against her phone screen. "Mom, we found a place called Sunset Manor. It's perfect for someone in your situation. The rent is only $800 a month and includes basic utilities. It's really quite generous of us to help you with a deposit. Marcus added, not looking up from his own phone. Though I have to say, you'll need to be more careful with your spending going forward. We can't keep bailing you out every time you have a financial crisis. Elena paused in her packing, holding an old photograph of the three of them from Christmas 5 years ago. In the picture, they were all smiling, Marcus and Isabella flanking their mother like protective guardians. How quickly love could transform into inconvenience. I never asked you to bail me out, Elena said softly. Oh, please, Isabella scoffed. The hospital bills, the medications, that time we paid for your car repairs. It all adds up, Mother. We have our own families to think about now. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the photograph in tissue paper. Her children had no idea that the car repairs they grudgingly paid for, all $300, could have bought them each a fleet of luxury vehicles with what she had access to. But they'd made their choices clear. As Elena packed her most precious possession, the locked wooden box, Marcus noticed it for the first time. What's in there anyway? You've had that old thing forever. Just memories, Elena replied, clutching the box protectively. Probably just old letters and junk, Isabella muttered. Mom, you really need to start throwing things away. You can't take all this clutter to your new place. The new place. Sunset Manor wasn't just a modest apartment complex. It was a last-stop facility for people with nowhere else to go. Elena had driven by it once and seen the broken playground equipment, the peeling paint, and the defeated expressions of its residents. This was where her children thought she belonged. That evening, as Elena sat alone in her nearly empty apartment surrounded by boxes, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name her children had never seen, Blackwood and Associates legal firm. Mrs. Rodriguez Blackwood. Came the familiar voice of her attorney, Harold Blackwood, her late husband's nephew. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. We need to discuss the estate matters. The probate period is ending soon, and there are decisions that need to be made. Elena glanced around her bare walls. Harold, I think it's time. Time for what? Time to stop hiding. My children have made it very clear what they think of me. Perhaps it's time they learned who I really am. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elena, are you certain? Once this becomes public, there's no going back. The media attention alone will be... I'm tired of being invisible, Harold. I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. Schedule the reading. It's time for the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus was at his country club, regaling his friends with stories of his difficult mother. You wouldn't believe the drama, he said, swirling his bourbon. She actually had the nerve to act upset about moving out, as if we haven't done enough for her over the years. His friend Charles nodded sympathetically. It's tough when parents become a burden. My father went through the same thing. Sometimes you have to make the hard decisions for their own good. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Isabella and I are actually doing her a favor. She'll be around people her own age, people in her income bracket. She'll be happier. But Marcus wasn't thinking about his mother's happiness at all. He was thinking about the relief of not having to explain her presence to his social circles anymore. No more embarrassing phone calls during important meetings. No more having to introduce the woman in the faded dress as his mother. Isabella was having a similar conversation with her fiancé, Richard, as they toured venues for their upcoming wedding. I'm so relieved we won't have to worry about her anymore, Isabella confided as they walked to the ballroom of an exclusive hotel. Can you imagine if she'd shown up here looking like herself? The partners at my firm would never take me seriously again. Richard, who had met Elena only twice and found her to be kind and thoughtful, felt a twinge of discomfort. She seemed nice enough when I met her. A little quiet, maybe, but... Nice doesn't pay for venues like this, Isabella interrupted, gesturing around the opulent space. We can't afford to be associated with that level of mediocrity. Not if we want to build the kind of life we deserve. What Isabella didn't realize was that her mother could have bought the entire hotel chain without blinking an eye. 3 days later, Elena received another call from Harold. Everything is arranged, he said. The reading is scheduled for next Friday at 2 o'clock. Should I send the invitations to Marcus and Isabella? Elena took a deep breath. Yes, but Harold, don't tell him what it's about. Just say it's regarding a family matter that requires their presence. And the media? Let them find out with everyone else. That same afternoon, as Elena was loading the last of her boxes into a rented moving truck, because neither of her children had offered to help, she received visitors she hadn't expected. Mrs. Chun from next door appeared with a casserole dish, her eyes red from crying. Behind her stood Mr. Peterson, the elderly widower from the first floor, and Mrs. Williams, the young single mother from across the hall. We can't believe they're making you leave, Mrs. Chun said, her voice shaking with emotion. You've been like a guardian angel to all of us. Elena was confused. What do you mean? Mr. Peterson stepped forward, his weathered hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. The anonymous donations that paid for my wife's cancer treatments last year. The scholarship money that's sending Mrs. Williams' daughter to college. The grocery deliveries when we couldn't afford food. He looked directly into Elena's eyes. It was you, wasn't it? Elena's facade cracked for just a moment. These neighbors had figured out what her own children never had, that their quiet, unassuming neighbor was someone extraordinary. I don't know what you're talking about, Elena said softly, but her smile gave her away. Mrs. Williams began to cry. You saved my daughter's future. She's going to be a doctor because of you, and I never even knew how to thank you. As Elena drove away from her apartment for the last time, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw her neighbors waving goodbye. They understood her worth in ways her own children never had. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. That evening, as Elena sat in her sparse new apartment at Sunset Manor, she opened the wooden box she'd guarded so carefully. Inside were documents that would have made her children's head spin. Stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements showing balances with so many zeros they looked like phone numbers. At the very bottom was a photograph of her late husband, Thomas Blackwood, standing in front of the Blackwood Industries headquarters. Thomas, who had died in a car accident when Marcus and Isabella were still children. Thomas, whose family owned one of the largest industrial empires in the country. Elena traced his face with her finger. They never understood why you chose me, she whispered. A factory worker's daughter who didn't fit into their world. But you saw something in me that even my own children can't see. She had kept his fortune in trust, living modestly, using the money quietly to help others, while waiting for the right time to claim her inheritance publicly. She had hoped that time would never come, that her children would love her for who she was, not what she had. But they had made their choice. And now it was time for the consequences. Do you think Elena is making the right choice by revealing her fortune, or should she continue to hide her wealth to protect her children's feelings? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you would do in her situation. Friday afternoon arrived with the weight of destiny. Elena sat in the mahogany panel conference room of Blackwood and Associates, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while her heart hammered against her ribs. She wore one of her 3 faded dresses, but today it felt like armor rather than shame. Harold Blackwood, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, shuffled through a stack of legal documents that seemed to grow thicker by the minute. The conference table could seat 20 people, but today it would host only 3. A mother and the 2 children who had thrown her away like yesterday's newspaper. At exactly 2 o'clock, Marcus burst through the doors, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face flushed with annoyance. This better be important, he snapped, checking his Rolex. I had to reschedule 3 client meetings for this, whatever this is. Isabella followed close behind, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to Judgment Day. She looked around the opulent law office with surprise. Mom, how did you even afford a lawyer in a place like this? Isabella asked suspiciously. These people charge more per hour than you make in a month. Elena simply smiled. Please, sit down, both of you. Harold cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. Thank you both for coming. I am Harold Blackwood, senior partner of Blackwood and Associates. I've asked you here today regarding the estate of Thomas Alexander Blackwood. Marcus looked confused. Who? I've never heard of any Thomas Blackwood. What does this have to do with us? Thomas Blackwood was my late husband. Elena said quietly, Your stepfather. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's mouth fell open, and Marcus actually laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound that echoed off the conference room walls. Stepfather? Marcus said, Mom, our father died when we were kids. You never remarried. You never even dated anyone seriously. You're right, Elena replied. Your biological father died when you were very young. But Thomas and I were married for 3 years before he passed away in that car accident. You were 8, Marcus. Isabella, you were 6. You don't remember because you were so young, and I never spoke about him after he died. Harold opened the first document. Thomas Blackwood was the heir to Blackwood Industries, one of the largest manufacturing and investment conglomerates in the country. Upon his death 24 years ago, his entire estate was left to his wife, Elena Rodriguez Blackwood. Isabella's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. We would have known. We would have... Would have what? Elena asked gently. Would have treated me differently? Would have loved me more. Harold continued reading from the will. The estate includes controlling shares in Blackwood Industries, valued at approximately $38 billion. Real estate holdings across 7 states, valued at approximately $4 billion. Investment portfolios, art collections, and various other assets bringing the total estate value to, he paused dramatically, $51.7 billion. Marcus stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. This is insane. This is some kind of joke. Mom, tell him this is a joke. But Elena wasn't laughing. She was looking at her children with an expression they had never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something far more devastating. Disappointment. It's not a joke, Marcus. I've been the legal owner of this fortune for over 2 decades. I chose to live simply because I wanted you both to understand the value of hard work, the importance of character over wealth. I wanted to raise you to be good people first, rich people second. Isabella's voice came out as a whisper. You've been rich this whole time? Billionaire rich. I've been wealthy in ways that matter, Elena replied. But yes, I've had access to more money than most countries have in their treasuries. Harold pulled out another set of documents. Mrs. Rodriguez Blackwood has been using her inheritance for philanthropic purposes. Over the past 24 years, she has donated over $15 billion to various charities, established scholarship funds, built hospitals, and helped countless families in need. Marcus was pacing now, his face red with rage and confusion. You let us think you were poor. You let us worry about your medical bills, your rent, your food. We felt sorry for you. And how did that pity translate into action? Elena asked calmly. You worried about my bills but refused to visit unless I promised to cook your favorite meals. You worried about my health but hung up when I called for help during my heart episode. Isabella finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. Why didn't you tell us? We're your children. We deserve to know. Did you? Elena stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite everything. Did you deserve to know when you were embarrassed to introduce me to your friends? Did you deserve to know when you suggested I was too ordinary for your wedding? Did you deserve to know when you moved me into that horrible apartment complex because you thought it was appropriate for my situation? The truth hit them like a physical blow. All those times they looked down on their mother made her feel small and insignificant. She could have bought and sold their entire social circles without even checking her bank balance. Harold consulted his notes. There's more. Mrs. Rodriguez Blackwood, would you like me to continue? Elena nodded. In addition to her charitable giving, Mrs. Rodriguez Blackwood has been the anonymous benefactor behind many of the opportunities her children have enjoyed. Marcus, your full scholarship to Harvard Business School? That was funded by your mother through the Blackwood Foundation. Isabella, the internship at Preston and Associates that launched your legal career? Your mother made a substantial donation to ensure you got that position. Marcus sat down heavily, his head in his hands. That's impossible. I earned that scholarship. I worked for that internship. You did work hard, Elena said softly. I made sure the opportunities were there, but you had to be good enough to earn them. I never wanted to hand you success. I wanted to help you achieve it. Isabella was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Mom, we didn't know. We couldn't have known. But you knew I loved you, Elena replied. You knew I sacrificed for you. You knew I would have done anything for you. And when I needed you most, you threw me away like garbage. Harold cleared his throat again. There's one final matter to discuss. Mrs. Rodriguez Blackwood, you called this meeting for a specific purpose. Would you like to proceed? Elena looked at her children, really looked at them, for what might be the last time as their mother in the way they had always known her. Yes, Harold. Please read them the new will. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What new will? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. Elena's voice was steady as granite. The will I had drafted 3 days ago. The one that determines what happens to the $50 billion you've just learned about. If you were Elena, what would you do with the inheritance at this point? Would you forgive your children immediately? Or would you make them prove they've learned their lesson? Let me know what you think in the comments. Harold Blackwood opened a crisp manila folder, the sound of papers rustling like autumn leaves before a storm. Marcus and Isabella sat frozen in their chairs, their faces pale as marble statues as the magnitude of the situation began to sink in. The last will and testament of Elena Rodriguez Blackwood, Harold began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. Drafted and executed on Monday, December 12th, witnessed and notarized according to all legal requirements. Isabella reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling as she tried to grasp her mother's hand. Mom, please, whatever you're thinking of doing, we can talk about this. We can fix this. Elena gently but firmly pulled her hand away. Fix what, Isabella? The years of treating me like an embarrassment? The way you made me feel ashamed of who I am? Marcus jumped his feet, his composure completely shattered. This is blackmail. You can't dangle $50 billion over our heads because we hurt your feelings. Sit down, Marcus, Elena said quietly, but there was steel in her voice that neither of her children had ever heard before. You're about to learn what consequences really mean. Harold adjusted his glasses and continued reading. I, Elena Rodriguez Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils and declare this to be my last will and testament. The silence in the room was suffocating. Isabella had stopped crying, but her hand shook as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. To my son, Marcus Rodriguez, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be held in trust until he can demonstrate genuine understanding of the value of family, compassion, and humility. Marcus's face went from pale to crimson. 100,000? Out of 50 billion? Mom, this is insane. I'm your son. You are my son, Elena agreed sadly. But you stopped acting like my son long ago. You became someone who was ashamed of me, someone who saw me as a burden to be hidden away. Harold continued, to my daughter, Isabella Rodriguez, I leave the sum of $100,000, also to be held in trust under the same conditions as her brother. Isabella's professional composure cracked completely. Mom, please. I'm getting married next month. Richard and I have plans. We've made commitments based on what we thought we knew about our financial future. Based on what? Elena asked pointedly. Based on your assumption that you'd inherit whatever meager savings your poor mother might have scraped together? Or were you counting on something else? The truth hung in the air like smoke. Both Marcus and Isabella had made financial decisions assuming their mother had nothing to leave them, yet somehow they had still expected to benefit from her death. The hypocrisy was stunning. Harold cleared his throat and continued. The remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $51.6 billion, is to be distributed as follows. Marcus gripped the edge of the conference table so tightly his knuckles turned white. This was it, the moment that would determine whether he would remain a wealthy investment banker or become one of the richest people on earth. $30 billion is to be placed in the Thomas Blackwell Memorial Foundation to continue the philanthropic work that has been my life's passion. This foundation will provide scholarships, medical care, housing assistance, and emergency aid to families in need. Isabella made a sound like a wounded animal. $30 billion to charity. $20 billion, Harold continued, is to be distributed equally among the tenants and neighbors of Elena's former apartment building, with additional funds set aside for Mrs. Chun, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Williams, and others who showed kindness and genuine concern during Elena's time of need. Marcus was hyperventilating now. You're giving $20 billion to your neighbors? People you barely knew? People who knew me better in 6 months than my own children knew me in 30 years, Elena replied calmly. Mrs. Chun brought me soup when I was sick. Mr. Peterson shoveled my walkway every time it snowed. Mrs. Williams' daughter sent me a thank you card every semester for scholarship she never knew I provided. They saw value in a person you thought was worthless. Harold turned to the final page. The remaining assets, approximately $1.6 billion, are to be held in trust for Marcus and Isabella Rodriguez, to be released only upon completion of specific conditions designed to test their character and commitment to family values. What conditions? Isabella whispered. Elena stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite the emotional carnage around her. You want to know the conditions? You each must spend 1 full year living exactly as I lived. Same income level, same modest apartment, same simple lifestyle. You must work regular jobs, not your high-paying careers, and learn what it means to struggle. Marcus laughed bitterly. You want us to be poor? You want us to throw away our careers? I want you to understand empathy, Elena replied. I want you to know what it feels like to be looked down upon, to be judged by your appearance instead of your character. I want you to learn that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. Isabella was crying again, but this time her tears seemed genuine rather than manipulative. Mom, I never realized. We never knew you felt this way. You never asked, Elena said simply. In 30 years, neither of you ever asked me about my dreams, my fears, my hopes for the future. You never asked about your stepfather or why I kept his memory so private. You never wondered why I chose to live the way I did. Harold packed up his documents. The trust conditions are quite specific. Each of you must maintain employment at or below minimum wage for 12 consecutive months. You must live in housing that costs no more than 30% of your earned income. You must volunteer at least 20 hours per month at a charity of your choice. And most importantly, you must write a letter to your mother once per week, demonstrating genuine reflection on your behavior and growth as human beings. And if we refuse? Marcus asked, though his voice had lost all its earlier bravado. Then your inheritance reverts to the foundation, Elena replied. You get your $100,000, and that's all. Forever. The weight of the choice settled over them like a heavy blanket. Walk away with enough money to be comfortable but not wealthy, or humble themselves completely for a chance at generational wealth. Isabella looked up at her mother, and for the first time in years, Elena saw something genuine in her daughter's eyes. Mom, what if we do everything you're asking? What if we complete the year and prove we've changed? Will you forgive us? Elena's expression softened slightly. Isabella, forgiveness isn't something that comes at the end of a year-long test. Forgiveness is something that happens when you truly understand the harm you've caused and commit to being better. The question isn't whether I'll forgive you. The question is whether you'll be able to forgive yourselves. Marcus was staring at the floor, his shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red with tears Elena hadn't seen since he was a small boy. I called you a burden, he whispered. When you were having chest pains and needed help, I called you a burden. Yes, you did. You could have died alone in that apartment while I was at dinner with clients who don't even remember my name. Yes, I could have. Marcus covered his face with his hands. Oh, God, Mom. What have we done? For the first time since the meeting began, Elena's composure cracked slightly. These were still her children, no matter how badly they behaved. Seeing them finally understand the magnitude of their cruelty was almost as painful as experiencing it had been. You made choices, Elena said softly. Now you have the opportunity to make different ones. Isabella stood up shakily. The wedding? Richard, how am I supposed to explain this to him? How do I tell my fiancé that I've been living a lie? The same way you tell yourself, Elena replied. With honesty. For the first time in years, you have the chance to be completely honest about who you are and what you've done. Harold handed each of them a business card. You have 72 hours to decide. If you choose to accept the conditions, my office will help you transition into your new living situations and employment. If you decline, the $100,000 inheritance will be available immediately. As the meeting concluded, Marcus and Isabella found themselves standing in the marble lobby of the law firm, surrounded by luxury, but feeling poorer than they had ever felt in their lives. $50 billion, Isabella whispered. She had $50 billion this whole time. And we threw her away, Marcus replied hollowly. We threw away the most valuable person in our lives because we thought she wasn't valuable enough. They walked toward the exit in silence, each carrying the weight of a decision that would define the rest of their lives. Behind them, Elena remained in the conference room, staring out the city skyline and wondering if she had just lost her children forever, or she had finally found a way to get them back. Do you think Marcus and Isabella deserve a second chance, or has their behavior been too cruel to forgive? And what would you do if you were in their shoes right now? Take the easy money or accept the challenge? Share your thoughts below. 72 hours. 3 days to choose between pride and redemption, between comfort and transformation. For Marcus and Isabella Rodriguez, these would be the longest 3 days of their lives. Marcus sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, staring at Harold Blackwood's business card as if it might spontaneously combust. His secretary had buzzed him 3 times about urgent client calls, but he couldn't focus on anything except the impossible choice before him. $1.6 billion. Even split between him and Isabella, that was $800 million each. Enough money to buy small countries, to live like royalty for 1,000 lifetimes. But the price was his dignity, his career, everything he had built his identity around. His phone rang, and Isabella's name appeared on the screen. Have you decided? She asked without preamble, her voice hollow and exhausted. Have you? Marcus countered. There was a long pause. I told Richard everything last night. Marcus felt his stomach drop. And he left. Isabella's voice cracked slightly. He actually packed his bags and left. Said he couldn't marry someone whose family life was built on lies and cruelty. He said he never knew I could be so heartless. Marcus closed his eyes. Richard had seemed like such a shallow social climber, but apparently even he had standards that Isabella had failed to meet. I'm sorry, Bella. Are you? Or are you relieved that you don't have to be embarrassed by my poor mother at my wedding? The bitterness in Isabella's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow because they were true. Part of him had been relieved when Isabella's engagement meant fewer family gatherings, fewer opportunities for their mother's simple lifestyle to clash with their sophisticated image. God, Bella, what kind of people have we become? Isabella was crying now. The kind of people who throw away their mother like trash. The kind of people who care more about what strangers think than about the woman who sacrificed everything for us. That evening, Marcus found himself driving to Sunset Manor, the apartment complex where they had banished their mother. He sat in his luxury car in the parking lot, looking at the peeling paint and broken playground equipment, and felt sick to his stomach. This was where they had sent Elena Rodriguez Blackwood, one of the wealthiest women in the world. This was what they had deemed appropriate for her situation. He walked up to apartment 2B and knocked softly on the door. Elena opened it wearing one of her 3 faded dresses, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a book in her hand. For a moment, Marcus was transported back to his childhood, to countless evenings when she would read him bedtime stories after working double shifts. Marcus, she said quietly, I wasn't expecting you. Can I come in? Elena stepped aside, and Marcus entered the tiny apartment that was smaller than his walk-in closet. The furniture was second-hand, the carpet was worn thin, and the kitchen was barely functional. But there were fresh flowers on the windowsill and family photos that included him and Isabella smiling and happy, arranged lovingly on a small table. You kept our pictures, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Of course I did. You're my children. I may not like your choices, but I never stopped loving you. Marcus sat down heavily on the small couch. Mom, I need to understand something. Why did you really hide the money? And don't tell me it was about teaching us values. There has to be more to it than that. Elena sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Do you remember your stepfather at all? Thomas. Marcus searched his memory. Fragments came back. A tall man with kind eyes, someone who used to carry him on his shoulders, who made his mother laugh in a way Marcus hadn't heard since. A little. I remember he made you happy. Thomas grew up with enormous wealth, but also with enormous pressure. His family expected him to marry within their social circle, to maintain appearances, to never step outside the boundaries of their world. Elena's eyes grew distant. When he chose to marry me, a factory worker's daughter from the wrong side of town, his family disowned him. They cut him off? Completely. He gave up his inheritance, his family connections, everything to be with me. But Wade died in that accident. The lawyers discovered that his grandfathers had named Thomas as the sole heir, regardless of his family's disapproval. Everything came to me. Marcus was beginning to understand. So you inherited money from people who hated you. I inherited money from people who judged me without knowing me. Just like... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Just like we did. Elena nodded sadly. I wanted to prove that wealth doesn't determine worth. I wanted you both to value people for their character, their kindness, their integrity. But instead, you learned to judge people exactly the way Thomas's family judged me. The next morning, Isabella made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked into a prestigious law firm where she was a partner and requested an immediate leave of absence. Isabella, you're up for senior partner next month, her colleague David protested. This is the worst possible timing. I know, Isabella replied, cleaning out her desk, but I've realized that there are more important things than making senior partner. Like what? Isabella paused, holding a photo of herself receiving an award for Young Lawyer of the Year. An award she had won thanks to connections her mother had secretly provided, like learning how to be a decent human being. That afternoon, both Marcus and Isabella found themselves back in Harold Blackwood's office. We accept the conditions, Marcus said without preamble. Harold raised an eyebrow. Both of you? You understand what you're agreeing to. We understand, Isabella said firmly. We need to do this. Not for the money, though I won't lie and say the money doesn't matter, but because we need to learn how to be the kind of people our mother deserved to have as children. Harold consulted his notes. Very well. Marcus, we've arranged for you to work as a stock clerk at Mercy General Hospital's supply department. Minimum wage, 40 hours per week. Isabella, you'll be working as a teacher's aide at Roosevelt Elementary School, also minimum wage. Marcus nodded. What about housing? There are apartments available in the Riverside District. 1-bedroom units, approximately $600 per month, including utilities. Basic but clean and safe. Isabella thought about her current penthouse apartment with its marble countertops and city views. We'll take them. The volunteer requirements begin immediately. We've identified several charities that need assistance. Marcus, you'll be working with the homeless shelter downtown. Isabella, you'll be helping at the Children's Hospital. As they signed the paperwork that would transform their lives, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Nervous excitement. Not the adrenaline rush of closing a $1 million deal, but the genuine anticipation of doing something meaningful. There's one more thing, Harold added. Your mother has requested that you not contact her during the first 3 months of your probationary period. She wants you to focus on your own growth without trying to manipulate her emotions. Isabella's face fell. She doesn't want to see us at all. She wants to see who you become when you're not performing for her benefit. She wants your transformation to be genuine, not strategic. That evening, Marcus stood in his new apartment, a space roughly the size of his former bathroom, and felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, he wasn't worried about impressing anyone or maintaining an image. He was just Marcus, starting over. His phone rang. Isabella, how's your new place? She asked. Humbling, Marcus replied, looking around at the second-hand furniture and single window that overlooked a parking lot instead of skyline. Yours. Humbling, Isabella agreed. Marcus, do you think we can really do this? Do you think we can change enough to deserve her forgiveness? Marcus thought about their mother, sitting alone in her tiny apartment at Sunset Manor, surrounded by photos of children who had abandoned her when she needed them most. I don't know if we deserve her forgiveness, he said quietly, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is becoming people who would never put her in that position again. $800 million, Isabella whispered. Yeah, each. But you know what? For the first time in my life, money feels like the least important part of this equation. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a genuine smile. Mom will be proud to hear you say that. Do you think she's watching somehow? Keeping track of how we're doing? Marcus looked at his reflection in the window, tired, humbled, but somehow more hopeful than he'd felt in years. I think she's been watching us our whole lives. The question is whether we're finally going to give her something worth watching. Do you believe people can truly change when faced with consequences this severe, Or do you think Marcus and Isabella are just going through motions for the money? What would it take to convince you that their transformation is genuine? Let me know your thoughts. 6 months into their transformation, Marcus Rodriguez barely recognized the man he used to be. His hands, once soft from a life of luxury, were now callous from loading medical supplies and organizing inventory at Mercy General Hospital. His expensive suits had been replaced by simple work clothes, and his penthouse lifestyle had given way to cooking modest meals in his tiny apartment kitchen. But the most profound change wasn't his appearance. It was in his perspective. "Mr. Rodriguez, could you help me with something?" asked Maria, an elderly patient who had been wheeled down to the supply area by mistake. She looked confused and frightened, clearly lost in the maze of hospital corridors. "Of course," Marcus said gently, abandoning his clipboard to kneel beside her wheelchair. "Where are you trying to go?" "I'm supposed to be in radiology, but I don't know where that is, and the nurse was so busy." Maria's voice trailed off, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. 6 months ago, Marcus would have directed her to the information desk and returned to his work. But now, looking at Maria's weathered hands and frightened expression, he saw his mother. He saw Elena, alone and scared in a hospital emergency room, while her children prioritized client dinners over her well-being. "Let me take you there myself," Marcus said, taking control of the wheelchair. "Don't worry, Mrs. Gonzalez. Maria Gonzalez. Mrs. Gonzalez, I'm going to make sure you get exactly where you need to be." As he wheeled her through the hospital corridors, Maria began to relax and chat. She told him about her grandchildren, her late husband, her worries about the test results she was waiting for. Marcus found himself genuinely interested in her stories, genuinely concerned about her welfare. "You're very kind, young man," Maria said as they reached the radiology department. Not many people take time to really care anymore. After ensuring Maria was properly checked in, Marcus returned to his workstation with a new understanding. This was what his mother had been trying to teach him, that every person had value, that kindness was a choice, that true wealth came from how you treated others. Meanwhile, across town, Isabella was discovering her own transformation at Roosevelt Elementary School. Working as a teacher's aide had initially felt like a punishment, a humiliating step backward from a prestigious legal career. But now, surrounded by 8-year-olds who didn't care about her former status or her designer handbags, she was learning lessons she had never encountered in law school. "Miss Isabella," called out Jamie, a shy little boy who reminded her painfully of Marcus as a child. "I can't read this word." Isabella knelt down beside Jamie's desk, looking at the storybook he was struggling with. The word was sacrifice. "That's a big word," Isabella said gently. "It means when you give up something important to help someone else." Jamie's brow furrowed in concentration. "Like when my mom works extra jobs so I can have new shoes?" Isabella felt her throat tighten. "Yes, exactly like that. Your mom sacrifices her time and energy because she loves you." As Jamie returned to his reading, Isabella thought about all the sacrifices Elena had made, the double shifts, the worn dresses, the quiet dignity in the face of her children's embarrassment. How had she missed it for so long? Her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital had been even more eye-opening. 3 evenings a week, Isabella read stories to young patients, many of whom were facing challenges that made her own problems seem trivial. There was 7-year-old Emma, battling leukemia with more courage than Isabella had ever shown in a courtroom. There was 12-year-old David, who had lost both parents in an accident, but still managed to smile and encourage other children. "Miss Isabella," Emma had said during one of their reading sessions, "why do you look so sad sometimes?" "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking." "About what?" Isabella had considered how to answer. "I'm thinking about how I treated someone very important to me. I wasn't very nice to her, and now I'm trying to learn how to be better." Emma nodded solemnly. "My mommy says it's never too late to say sorry if you really mean it. Your mommy sounds very wise." "She is. Maybe you should listen to your mommy, too." The months passed, and both Marcus and Isabella found themselves writing their required weekly letters to Elena. Letters they poured their hearts into, even though they received no responses. They wrote about their jobs, their volunteer experiences, their slowly changing perspectives on life and relationships. Marcus wrote about Mrs. Patterson, an elderly homeless woman who visited the shelter where he volunteered. Despite having lost everything, she maintained a dignity and kindness that put his former complaints about minor inconveniences to shame. He wrote about learning to budget his small paycheck, about the satisfaction of earning money through honest work rather than manipulation and networking. Isabella wrote about her students, about the children in the hospital, about how she had begun to understand that success wasn't measured in billable hours or partnership tracks, but in the positive impact you had on other people's lives. She wrote about learning to live simply, about discovering that happiness didn't require expensive restaurants or designer clothes. Neither sibling knew if Elena was reading their letters, but they continued writing them because the process itself was healing. Each letter forced them to reflect, to examine their growth, to articulate the changes happening in their hearts. As the 9-month mark approached, Harold Blackwood contacted them both. "Your mother has requested a meeting," he said during a conference call. "She's been monitoring your progress." "Monitoring how?" Isabella asked nervously. "She's had people checking on you." "Not spying, exactly, but observing." "Mrs. Gonzalez from the hospital?" "She's been reporting back about Marcus's kindness and dedication. The principal at Roosevelt Elementary has been sharing stories about Isabella's work with the children. The supervisors at your volunteer positions have been providing updates." Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and hope. "What does she want to meet about?" "I think it's time for you to ask her that yourself." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a small cafe near Elena's apartment. Not the opulent law office where their world had been turned upside down, but a simple neighborhood place where Elena had become a regular customer. When Marcus and Isabella arrived, they barely recognized their mother. Elena looked lighter somehow. The weight of disappointment that had shadowed her features for so long seemed to have lifted. She was still wearing one of her simple dresses, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that took their breath away. "Mom," Isabella said softly, tears already forming in her eyes. "Please sit," Elena said, gesturing to the empty chairs across from her. "You both look well." They did look different. Marcus had lost the soft edges that came from luxury living, and his face showed character lines that hadn't been there before. Isabella's designer polish had been replaced by something more genuine, the glow of someone who had found purpose beyond personal advancement. "I've been reading your letters," Elena said simply. Marcus felt his heart skip. "All of them. Every single one. And I've been receiving reports about your work, your volunteer activities, the way you've been treating people." Elena's voice was gentle but still guarded. "I'm proud of the progress you've made. But..." Isabella sensed hesitation in her mother's tone. "But I need to know that these changes are real, that they'll last beyond the 12-month requirement. I need to know that you understand what you put me through, and that you're committed to being better people regardless of what happens with the inheritance." Marcus leaned forward earnestly. "Mom, working at the hospital, volunteering at the shelter, it showed me how selfish I was, how blind I was to other people's struggles, including yours. I can't undo what I did, but I can promise you that I'll never again judge someone's worth by their bank account or their appearance." Isabella nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "I've learned so much working with children. They see people so clearly, without all the prejudices and social expectations that I let cloud my judgment. When I think about how I was embarrassed by you, how I thought you weren't good enough for my wedding." She couldn't finish the sentence. Elena reached across the table and took both their hands in hers. Hands that were no longer soft and manicured, but strong and capable from honest work. "My children," she said softly. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear those words." For the first time in over a year, the three of them sat together not as adversaries in a legal battle, but as a family beginning to heal. "Does this mean..." Marcus began hopefully. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile they had seen from her in years. "It means we have a lot more work to do. But yes, I think we can move forward together." "Do you think Elena should fully forgive her children at this point? Or should she make them complete the full year to prove their commitment? How much second chances would you give to family members who had hurt you this deeply? Share your perspective in the comments. 1 year later, the Rodriguez family gathered once again in Harold Blackwood's conference room. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Where once there had been tension, betrayal, and shock, now there was something that had been missing for far too long. Genuine love and respect. Marcus sat beside his mother, no longer the arrogant investment banker who had been embarrassed by her simple lifestyle. His year of humble living had carved character into his features and wisdom into his heart. Isabella, seated on Elena's other side, bore little resemblance to the status-obsessed lawyer who had once considered her mother too ordinary for her wedding. "Well," Harold said with a smile, consulting his documents, "I'm pleased to report that both Marcus and Isabella have successfully completed all requirements of their probationary period." Elena nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "Harold, before we proceed with the inheritance distribution, I have something to say." Marcus and Isabella exchanged glances, sudden anxiety flickering in their eyes. After everything they had been through, everything they had learned and changed, was their mother about to pull away the fortune again? "This past year," Elena began, her voice steady and clear, "I've watched my children transform from people I barely recognize into individuals I'm proud to call my own. But more than that, I've learned something about myself." She stood up slowly, walking to the large window that overlooked the city where all their lives had been forever altered. "I spent so many years hiding my wealth, thinking that poverty would teach you values. But I realize now that I was as guilty of deception as you were of cruelty. I robbed you the chance to know your stepfather's legacy, to understand the family history that was rightfully yours." Marcus spoke softly. Mom, we understand why you did it, after how we treated you. No, Elena interrupted gently. What you did was wrong, but my response was also flawed. True character isn't taught through deprivation. It's taught through example, through open communication, through love that doesn't hide behind tests and conditions. She turned back to face them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I spent 24 years trying to prove that money doesn't define worth, but in doing so, I used money to define your worth. I made your inheritance conditional on your behavior, just like Thomas's family made his acceptance conditional on his marriage choices. Isabella was crying now. But Mom, we deserve those conditions. We deserve to learn. You deserved honesty, Elena said firmly. You deserved a mother who trusted you enough to share the truth and guide you toward wisdom, not one who manipulated you through financial punishment. Harold cleared his throat gently. Elena, if you're having second thoughts about the inheritance structure, I'm not having second thoughts about giving them their inheritance, Elena said with a smile. I'm having second thoughts about the trust conditions I imposed. She returned to her seat, taking both her children's hands in hers. Marcus, Isabella, I want you to have your full inheritance immediately. No more conditions, no more tests. You've already proven that you can live with integrity, kindness, and humility. The rest is up to you. Marcus was stunned. Mom, are you sure? $800 million each is. It's life-changing money. It is, Elena agreed, but you've already changed your lives. You've learned to find meaning in work that helps others. You've discovered that happiness comes from relationships, not possessions. You become people who would use great wealth as a tool for good, not just personal indulgence. Isabella wiped her eyes. What if we mess up? What if having all that money makes us forget the lessons we've learned? Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. Then you'll remember them again, because the most important lesson isn't about living without money. It's about living with purpose. And you both found your purpose. Harold began preparing the final inheritance documents. So the full $1.6 billion will be distributed equally between Marcus and Isabella, with no remaining trust conditions? That's correct, Elena confirmed. But I have one request, not a condition, just a request. Anything, Marcus said immediately. I want you to continue the work you've been doing. Marcus, your supervisor at Mercy General told me you have a gift for connecting with patients and families in crisis. Isabella, the principal at Roosevelt Elementary, said you've been considering going back to school to become a teacher. Marcus nodded. Actually, I've been thinking about that a lot. Investment banking made me money, but working at a hospital, it makes me feel alive in a way I never experienced before. And I've already applied to the education program at the university, Isabella added. I want to work with children from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids who need someone to believe in them the way you always believed in us. Elena's smile could have powered the entire building. That's all I ever wanted, for you to find work that fulfills your souls, not just your bank accounts. 6 months later, the changes in the Rodriguez family were miraculous to behold. Marcus had used a portion of his inheritance to establish the Maria Gonzalez Foundation, providing free medical transportation and support services for elderly patients. He continued working at the hospital, but now as a volunteer coordinator, using his business skills to streamline operations and improve patient care. Isabella had returned to school and was working toward her teaching certification while simultaneously funding a scholarship program for children from low-income families. She had also quietly paid for the wedding of Mrs. Williams' daughter, the same Mrs. Williams who had been Elena's neighbor and one of the few people to show genuine kindness during Elena's darkest days. But perhaps the most beautiful change was in Elena herself. She had moved out of the tiny apartment at Sunset Manor and into a comfortable home near both her children. Not a mansion. She still preferred simplicity, but a warm, welcoming place where the family gathered every Sunday for dinner. You know what I've realized? Elena said during one of these Sunday dinners, looking around the table at Marcus, Isabella, and Isabella's new boyfriend, an elementary school principal who loved her for her dedication to children, not her bank account. What's that, Mom? Isabella asked, serving herself from a simple but delicious meal Elena had prepared. Wealth was never the problem, and poverty was never the solution. The problem was that we stopped talking to each other. We stopped seeing each other as people deserving of love and respect. Marcus raised his glass of wine, not an expensive vintage, but a modest bottle they all enjoyed. To second chances. To family, Isabella added. To love that sees past appearances to the heart of a person, Elena concluded. As they clinked glasses, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about Thomas Blackwood, the man whose love had taught her that true wealth came in many forms. She thought about the neighbors who had shown her kindness when her own children had abandoned her. She thought about the year of struggle that had transformed Marcus and Isabella from spoiled adults into compassionate human beings. Most of all, she thought about the power of forgiveness, Not just a forgiveness of her children, but their forgiveness of themselves, and forgiveness she had finally granted herself for the mistakes she had made as a mother. The $50 billion inheritance had been divided according to Elena's final wishes. $30 billion to charity, $20 billion to the people who had shown kindness when it mattered most, and $1.6 billion to her children, who had finally learned that money's only true value was in how it was used to help others. But the real inheritance, the legacy of love, redemption, and second chances, was worth far more than any dollar amount could ever represent. This story reminds us that families can heal from even the deepest wounds, that people can change when faced with the consequences of their actions, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. Elena Rodriguez Blackwood didn't just leave her children money. She left them something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge of how to live with purpose, compassion, and integrity. What do you think is the most important lesson from Elena's story? Is it about the danger of judging people by their appearance, the power of redemption, or something else entirely? And have you ever had to give someone in your life a second chance after they hurt you deeply? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help make these stories even more meaningful. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible true stories about family, forgiveness, and the surprising ways life can change in an instant. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these powerful tales that remind us what it truly means to be human.